Hello, everyone, and a big welcome to all the kids, parents, classes, science, and nature lovers out there. Thanks so much for joining the Ontario Science Centre today for our chat about the great outdoors. My name is Laura Murray from the Ontario Science Centre, and I studied wildlife biology and ecology, and I love talking about and exploring the great outdoors in all seasons. But I'm pretty excited to welcome our special guest today from Science North in Sudbury. Hello, Megan.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm here in the Science Center in Sudbury. I'm going to take my mask off now, though, just so that everyone can hear me a little bit better. So my colleagues who are doing animal care with me today are going to stay back from me. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm super excited. A little bit about my background is that I studied zoology and have been doing animal care and education when it comes to our animals and ecosystems across Canada for the past about 15 years. And so it's definitely one of my passions, and I'm excited to talk about it with you today.
Well, we're so glad you can join us. We've done a few of these chats with Science North, and it's really great to be able to compare. You're about 400 kilometers north of us, so a different part of the province. So it's nice to be able to have those chats. I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement. So welcome to the audience watching from across Ontario and beyond on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for millennia. The name for our province, Ontario, came from an Iroquois word meaning sparkling water or beautiful lake. And that seems very fitting to honor our province's 250,000 beautiful sparkling lakes. I am a settler, descended from 5 generations of Welsh, Scottish, and English immigrants and settlers, and acknowledge that Toronto, the land I live and work on, is the ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe Nation and includes the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Toronto is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and the Toronto Purchase Treaty signed with the Mississaugas of the New Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with the Chippewa Nation. Toronto is now also home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. I am thankful for the careful stewardship of the land and water by Indigenous people past and present who honor nature's rhythms. The warmth of the sun, extra hours of daylight, and ample rainfall mark the beginning of summer's growth and renewal. Caring for the land, all people, and all life that depend on it is a shared responsibility and begins with connecting to and respecting nature. I also want to acknowledge the recent discovery of the unmarked remains of 215 Indigenous children at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, and that has sent a wave of grief and shock across the country. Rooted in racism, the harm and atrocities inflicted on Indigenous peoples through colonial policies and institutions like residential schools continues today. We must act on reconciliation, and every child matters. Thank you. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Laura. That was a wonderful acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that here at Science North, I am on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabe, and Wanapitei First Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the Métis Nation for their cultural and economic contributions in this area. These lands sit in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area, and it is important for all of us to remember that we were all treaty people.
Thanks, Megan. And we're gonna start our chat today, and we're gonna actually talk about. I've mentioned the 4 seasons, and Ontario, I have to say, is a great province for exploring in any season. Megan, can you just remind us why we do have 4 seasons?
Absolutely, for sure. So seasons happen because I got to get my trusty globe over here.
Nice.
So I'm going to back up a little bit. So as you can see, the seasons happen here in Canada and other places in the world too, because of the Earth's axis. So you see the Earth is sort of like at this 23-degree axis on its side. So as we sort of travel around the sun, and that takes a full year, right, to get around the sun, as we sort of like move either facing away or facing towards the sun on this trajectory, means that the sun is either going to be hitting North America directly, or it's going to be hitting it at a really big angle. And the more direct we are facing the sun, that's when we're going to get our summer, and we're going to warm up into spring. But then as we move away, going around the sun, we're going to have less direct sunlight, and that's when we're going to get into the fall and winter seasons. And it's really cool too, because there are seasons in other places of the world too, but it's really dependent on where you are near the equator. So up here in Canada, we're pretty far away from the equator. So the equator is this blue line here. So we have relatively short summers or shorter compared to somebody who might be living in the United States or even closer to the equator. So that's why we have seasons. And I don't know about you, Laura, but I'm very grateful for the seasons that we do have here in Canada.
I agree. I say lucky us for 4 seasons. And really, just as you said, it kind of all starts with the sun, right? And plants are harnessing this incredible, powerful energy from the sun. And that fuels this explosion of growth, plenty of food, and all kinds of new life in nature. And basically, every life form takes advantage of this summer season. Insects, birds, turtles, all of it. And it's all about feeding and breeding. Now, there's a lot of things I'm looking forward to with the change in the weather. One of them is going canoeing. I love paddling. I love birding, swimming in lakes, stargazing, being out in all kinds of different ecosystems. Megan, how will you be exploring the great outdoors this summer?
So like you, I enjoy paddling too, but more in a kayak rather than a canoe. I'm not very good at steering the canoe personally. But I'm also a big fan of camping. So hopefully we can get some camping in this summer, and definitely some hiking. I'm also a big fan of just sitting out in the sun and reading a good book. So
I 2 thumbs up on all that. That all sounds great to me. And so many ecosystems to explore and so little time. Now, ecosystems, they're kind of like this connected web of life that is also linked to their environment. And it's things like how much rain, how much sun, what sort of wind, what the soil is like, what are the rocks like, what's the geography like. And where you are in Sudbury is very different than where we are in Southern Ontario. And there's all kinds of different ecosystems. And if you have some ideas of types of ecosystems, you can put them in the chat. You know, forest is a type of ecosystem. Grasslands is a type of ecosystem. Coral reefs. You know, those are all types of ecosystems, but it turns out Megan and I share a favorite ecosystem, and that is wetlands. Hooray for wetlands. Megan, can you tell us a little bit more about what wetlands are and why they're important?
So I guess the easiest description of a wetland is very simply land area that is wet or has water in it, not necessarily a lake or a river. So they're a little bit different, and they do house one of the most richest biodiversities on our planet. Regardless of where you are, wetlands are very, very important for biodiversity and the number of plants and animals, including insects, mosses, different algae. These are all very specific to different types of wetlands as well, because there's 4 different types of wetlands, main types of wetlands, I should say. And some of the reasons why they're so important is because they act as natural protection against drought, because they hold so much water. Also, they are natural filters, so they filter out a lot of chemicals and other types of organic things out of the water to make it a little bit more fresh, a little bit more potable for us, but also for animals and plants that live there. And yeah, they're definitely one of my favorite ecosystems to explore in the summertime.
Me too. And you mentioned the idea of animals using them, right? Wildlife habitat, wetlands might be at the top of the list for wildlife habitat really around the world. Certainly here in Ontario, they're very, very important. They're huge nursery areas for things like fish and frogs and insects and birds, all kinds of animals nest or build a family in wetlands. So lots of important reasons. You also mentioned the hanging on to water thing. And here in Southern Ontario, we're in the middle of a drought.
Right.
We had a mild winter and a pretty dry spring. And, wetlands, well, the wetlands have to exist to hang on to the water, and the water has to fall first. And so we're in a bit of a drought. And but they can help to manage some of those things, just as you said. Unfortunately, here in Southern Ontario, we've lost about 70% of our wetlands. Now, as you said, there's 4 different types. Marshes, which are mostly, there's more open water. They're really productive, really rich in biodiversity, as you said. There's also swamps, which have a lot of trees. There's fens, and there's bogs. And here's a picture here. On the left, you can see what is a pretty typical marsh, some open water, some lily pads floating, some stuff coming out of the water. And on the right, you see a close-up of the picture of one of the plants. And this is cattail. This is that when Megan mentioned the idea of filtering the water, cattails are the ones that do it. They are the superstars of this. You can see the seed head on the top there, the brownish thing that kind of looks like a hot dog on a stick. That creates these fluffy seeds. It's used for nesting material. The leaves, of course, are photosynthesizing, so they're releasing oxygen. They're cleaning the water as well. Lots of birds nest in cattail marshes, things like red-winged blackbirds. So lots of important things tied just to the cattails. That's just the cattail part. Lots of things can hide in those. So I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture of a marsh. And imagine you're approaching a marsh from a distance. And we're going to take a look right from the sky right down into the water. As you approach, you hear the sound of red-winged blackbirds and frogs calling from those lily pads there. An osprey is flying high overhead looking for fish. Swallows are chasing mosquitoes over the open water, and they're good at it, which is a good thing. A mother moose and her calf are munching plants in the shallows. A heron is hiding in those cattails, waiting for a crayfish. Dragonflies are skimming the surface of the water, looking for newly emerged mosquitoes. So lots of things are going on above the water, right on the water. Water striders are skating right on the surface, that boundary between air and water. Below the water, turtles are feeding on underwater plants and algae. A sunfish is scraping out a nest to lay her eggs. A snapping turtle is resting in the mud, and the water is just teeming with tiny plankton and insect larvae and bits of plants and worms and tadpoles and all kinds of things. And supporting it all at the base of every food chain is plants that are harnessing that energy from the sun and creating food, but most importantly, oxygen. And if you've got other ideas of what you might see in a wetland, you can please put them in the chat. And the next slide we have is one of my favorite animals and favorite birds. I am a bird watcher. This is called a Canada warbler, a very handsome warbler, all very classy, wearing his necklace and his yellow spectacles, his yellow glasses. This is a long distance migrant. So these guys, like all warblers, are insect eaters. They're specialist insectivores. Not a lot of insects in Ontario in February, so they have to go south for the winter, and these ones are champions. 6,000 kilometers they travel all the way to South America, to Peru a lot of the time, which is kind of like flying from Toronto to Europe. So that is a huge migration, a lot of air miles they put on. And all along the way, they got to find food to eat. They're insect eaters. Guess where they stop? They stop at a lot of wetlands, places that are close to water, thickets and tangles. They like all that kind of stuff. And these are called staging areas. So they don't spend the winter there. They don't spend the summer there, but they're spending time in these sorts of wetlands all along the way. And because these wetlands are disappearing, these birds are threatened. They're losing their habitat. They're losing their areas to stay. Now, Megan, we mentioned some different types of wetlands, so I think you're going to talk about another type.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, there's a question here about how do they hold so much water, and one of the reasons is partially why, why this next wetland is my favorite. So my favorite wetland, and certainly one that we see a lot of up here in Northern Ontario, is bogs. And yes, there we go. And bogs are super cool because they're very unlike other types of wetlands. They don't get water from like underground sources or rivers or lakes. They get their water just from precipitation. So from rainfall or snowfall in the wintertime. So very, very special. But because of that, they're also very low in nutrients. And the biggest thing that the most biomass that you'll find in a bog is is peat moss or peat. And that is one of the reasons why like some wetlands hold so much water. It's because of these mosses, and they're really just like a sponge. And peat itself is very similar. It's basically just like half decomposed plant matter. And some bogs are thousands and thousands of years old because they decompose so slowly because there's not that much oxygen, there's not much nutrients going in and out of it. The water and the water itself and the environment is very acidic. And so it really means that the plants and the animals that live in that environment have to be super adapted to that environment. And that's one of the coolest things about bogs. And some of the animals or plants that are really specific to bogs are things like black spruce, really short trees. And you won't see a lot of tall things growing. Everything will be sort of short, close to the ground. And you'll get all these mosses, like I mentioned before, and the peat, and carnivorous plants. So carnivorous plants don't get their energy from the sun, or not all their energy from the sun like other plants do. They get it from eating other living things like small insects and sometimes larger things. So like amphibians or even larger insects like dragonflies and things like that. So it's really, really neat. And actually, I just found out from Laura that it is actually it's World Peatlands Day today. Is that correct, Laura?
Yeah, I love it. So peatlands, it's more of a British term, I think, but it's basically bogs. So it's World Bog Day. So like how appropriate. And bogs are amazing ecosystems, quite a different type of wetland, but crucially important as well. So that's just one of those nice accidents that it happened to be today.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is this idea that wetlands, they're the best of both worlds, right? They're land, they're water, it's kind of all coming together. And there's a group of animals, we've actually mentioned them a couple of times already, that kind of embody this idea of wetlands, and they sort of have a webbed toe in each of these two different types of habitats. So we're going to play a little game that is called Name That Amphibian, which is really cool. And so I hope everyone's ready. And what's neat is that amphibians call in the spring. The males call to attract a mate. And they do this from water. And they all have unique sorts of calls. So we're gonna show a picture, we're gonna play the call, and if you have some guesses about what amphibian it is, they're all from Ontario, I'll tell you that. You can put it in the chat. And so I think we're ready to start. Name That Amphibian. I love these guys. These guys are so great. Oh, I think we may be getting an echo. I'm not sure about that. And they especially have one toe on land and water. So if you know who this is, Megan, any answers coming up in the chat there?
Yes, there are a couple. Everyone, there's some bullfrog guesses. There's a couple of other frogs. Wolf frog. Never heard of that frog, but there are some people who are saying it's toad.
Yeah, that's right. This is the American toad, as it's called. And here's a fun fact for you. A group of toads is called a knot. That's the collective name for a group of toads. And they are champion mosquito munchers and early breeders. So already these guys have done their calling, and toadlets, tiny little toadlets, will be leaving the ponds and heading into the forest, because these guys only go to water for breeding. So I think we're ready for the next frog or amphibian. Love these ones.
Love it. Let's see. We have a couple of bullfrog guesses again. Bullfrogs seem to be very popular.
This one, there's a bit of a clue as to what it's resting on.
Yes, that's a good. Oh, there we go. I see some great frogs.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So great tree frogs are really neat because they are a tree frogs, which means that they live high up in the trees, usually in areas with still permanent water. And they have toe pads that are sticky, and you can see them in the photo there, which is really great. And the coolest thing about tree frogs, I think, is that they change color. So we have a tree frog here at Science North, and some days, especially in the summertime when it's nice and warm, he'll actually be a bright green, which is very cool. So depending on their energy levels or where they are on the tree, and you can camouflage a little bit more, they'll actually change colors, which is very cool.
Yeah, they're amazing with camouflage. Like, they can look like a bird poo or a hunk of lichen or anything. I have actually never seen one. They're such good at camouflage. Okay, I think we're ready for the next stinging amphibian.
I love it.
Yeah, these ones are great and pretty common across the province. They actually take 2 years right from the time they breed and lay their eggs to when you get adult frogs. Any answers coming up, Megan?
There's a few, again, lots of bullfrog guesses. We've got some toads.
Close. It's close to the bullfrog.
It's a little tricky to find.
Yeah, these are green frogs. And they're more of a sort of olivey green.
Yes.
But they're a good one. And I think we've got one more singing amphibian.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Oh, somebody's even giving the scientific names of some of the animals.
Oh, nice.
Oh, we've got lots of good people, good identifiers here. They're saying leopard frog.
Yep, that's the one.
That's it. Yeah, and this is absolutely one of the most common types of frog that we'll see. And then the thing about leopard frogs too is that they'll actually be found quite far away from water sometimes in grasslands, which is kind of neat. And something that's kind of interesting too is that whereas here in Ontario, like Southern Ontario, Northern Ontario, they're quite common, but in Western Canada, like out in Alberta and British Columbia, they're actually considered species at risk, and they're actually an endangered species. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, frogs and toads of all kinds can be at risk because they have this web toe in both worlds. And because they breathe through their skin, right? So they can be impacted by air pollution, by water pollution, by toxins on land. So they're actually a good indicator of ecosystem health in that way. But it's always great to hear them. And many of these frogs and toads actually sing into the summer, like bullfrogs. I know bullfrogs were popular in the chat. And green frogs, they sing well into the summer, and they all have quite distinctive sounds. So that's something to look for. What they do have in common is that they all eat insects. And we talked about wetlands as being a nursery area for lots of different critters, but that includes insects. Now, not many people are really that fond of insects, especially the biting insects at this time of year. The mosquitoes are coming out, the black flies, but they're a crucial part of any food chain. I think any food chain across the world, insects are a really important part. And we need all these insects to keep our ecosystems healthy. And frogs are a great indication of that. If you have any ideas of what other animals are insectivores, you can put that in the chat. And there's many beneficial insects as well. Megan, are you familiar with any beneficial insects?
Oh, my favorite. So I'm a beekeeper, but I also am super passionate about our native pollinators as well. And so bumblebees are probably one of the top ones for me, but of course butterflies, even wasps and flies are really important pollinators as well. And there are so many different types of bees. There are leafcutter bees and sweat bees, of course honeybees, but then bumblebees are definitely a underthought of, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a lot of animal underdogs that need a little love. And what's really cool is that there are lots of animals that take advantage of kind of when insects are most active. And there's a special name associated with that. So I think we've got a slide for this one.
Yes. And actually, just quickly here, because we're talking about insects, somebody actually asked Laura, what insects do the warblers eat?
Well, they eat pretty much anything. A lot of mosquitoes and midges and black flies. Mosquitoes breed in still water, like in lakes and ponds and stuff like that. And then all those adults emerge, and they're just starting to do that. So it's a hugely important food supply for warblers. And things like swallows and swifts and nighthawks and bats and all kinds of animals are really surviving on insects for the bulk of their diet.
Right.
But mosquitoes would make up a big part of it. Caterpillars, beetles, spiders, like you kind of name it, they'll eat most.
They're not picky.
No, and it's all good protein.
I think there are some suggestions in the chat too about some other underrated bugs, which are also spiders and dragonflies. And I think in relation to other pollinators, somebody also mentioned bats as well, which is really great.
Massive. Yeah, bats are one of my favorites. And dragonflies are supreme predators. So dragonflies are great. And so these animals that are active at dawn and dusk are known as crepuscular animals. You may have heard of animals that are nocturnal or animals that are diurnal, active during the day. Nocturnal means night. Crepuscular means that kind of hour before sunrise and the hour after sunset. And this is a really important time for many animals, not just insect eaters and insects, because the food is out there for sure, but things like prey animals like rabbits and deer. The light isn't as good. They can hide from predators a little bit more easily. And so there's a lot of animals that are active then. Moose tend to be active then. It's not as hot during the day. And I have to say I have a lot of favorites that are crepuscular animals. Yeah. One of my absolute favorites is fireflies. And June is the month in Ontario to look for fireflies. They're a type of beetle, so another insect. and they create, the males are trying to attract a mate. They create light. Basically, they create light in their bum. Like, how amazing is that?
Yep.
It's magical. And they're trying to attract a female. The females are hanging out in the leaf litter and the leftovers of leaves from last year. Another reason not to clean out your leaf litter and your brush and stuff like that. And so they're a great animal to look for at this time of year. And we've mentioned some other ones. Bats are one of my absolute favorites. Skunks, lots of things are out in these crepuscular times. And it's a Latin word that basically means twilight. Megan, any crepuscular animals up your way?
Yeah, for sure. So moose is definitely a big one. They're more active at dawn and dusk. And of course, you mentioned earlier skunks. And then here at Science North, we also have a beaver who likes to exhibit some crepuscular behavior as well. So yeah, beavers, moose. And then of course, black bears as well. And I think in a second, we have a video of a nighttime or crepuscular visitor to my backyard. So this is a black bear just walking right up onto my back deck. And he likes to make an appearance right around about like 8:30 to between 10:30 is usually when he comes around. More so last summer, but this is just from a couple of weeks ago. So he definitely likes to come around and sniff around our compost bin and our recycle bin as well. So yeah, he's definitely a really important one to be aware of if you're out and about and exploring and enjoying nature, especially here in Northern Ontario. We always have to be very aware that we're in black bear territory. That's their home.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, that's quite the crepuscular animal. I have to say, that's quite a surprise. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us to be safe when we're in the outdoors, respect animals in their homes and their habitats. We've actually got a video from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry about being bear wise and being safe.
Bears are shy and want to avoid humans, but they have an uncanny ability to sniff out easy food sources. They'll actually return to the same location the next time they get hungry. That's why relocating bears, even long distances, doesn't work. They will always remember where they found an easy meal. Don't let bears make your garbage their buffet. Keep it stored away until pickup day.
Yeah, that's it. I think, bears are expert sniffers, right? So the smells of garbage or barbecues or composters or all those things can bring them in. And this is a pretty lean time for bears. Mums are out with their cubs. And bears are actually mostly vegetarian. So, they're waiting for the berry crop, which hasn't come in yet. So we always have to remember to be aware, to be safe. And really to leave no trace. You mentioned camping, and that's an important message, certainly for anyone who's going camping.
Yeah.
It's also the time of year when lots of baby animals are out and about. They're exploring. They're not as expert as their parents. So be mindful when you're out and about. And those tiny toadlets are really hard to spot in the forest floor for sure.
Yeah. Actually, somebody has a question here, and they're asking if it's scary when the bear comes into my backyard. And to answer you quickly, no, it's not scary. We have to be aware of it, but it's also important that I do my due diligence and not leaving my compost out or my recycle bin or anything that the bear is going to want to get. So right now I don't feed the birds anymore because they can find lots of food. So I have to do my due diligence. So no, I don't think it's scary, but I have to make sure that I'm also being aware that he's coming into my backyard because of where I live. So we can coexist.
Yeah, that's it. It's all about being aware and being safe. And there's other ways that we need to be safe too, right? We have new invasive species moving into the province, things like ticks. So you want to make sure you're wearing your bug repellent and you're being safe around water and you've got your sunscreen and all those sorts of things. But there's lots of fun ways to explore when you're out in the great outdoors of Ontario for sure. Best advice is to not touch anything when you're out there, especially those frogs that breathe through their skin. Imagine what you might have on your hands: hand sanitizer and sunscreen and bug repellent. All of those things are toxic to frogs. So by all means, look at them and wonder at them and enjoy them, but best to leave them where they are. Now, things are changing, of course, in the province. I mentioned that we're in a bit of a drought now. And, we're seeing the effects of climate change all the time. New invasive species are moving in, are moving north, all those sorts of things. What sort of impacts from climate change are you seeing around Sudbury?
So I guess one of the biggest things that, especially since I've lived here the past 9 years, that our winters are very unpredictable. So whereas I'm used to seeing a lot of snow in the wintertime, for example, whereas we didn't get a lot of snow this year. So that really impacts the wetlands, as we mentioned earlier, because that's how they get some of their water, or most of their water in some cases. And the forests are a little bit drier, so that can definitely impact forest fire season. And of course, if climate change is warming our northern temperatures, which we see the data, that can impact things like fish, for example, because fish need cold water to breed, or they need a specific temperature in order to forage and hunt at. And if the water is warming, that means that they're going to have to forage deeper and in different in deeper parts of the lake where it's cooler, or different types of habitats altogether. So those are the types of things that we're seeing. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, with bogs and the peat and the muskegs that are further north than even where I am, the water impacts those wetlands as well.
Yeah, and they're important carbon sinks, right? Bogs especially. They're helping to manage the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if they dry out and start to die off, that is really bad news. Yeah. Here in southern Ontario, we're getting things are out of sync. The insects are emerging before the migratory birds are back, and that's bad. As I said, new animals are moving in, and so we've got a picture here. I surprised one of these on my back deck. It wasn't a bear, but last year I surprised one on my back deck. So we've got our final slide here of a new animal that didn't exist in Ontario even 20 or 30 years ago. And if you know what animal this is, I guess we've got it up there. This one isn't a quiz. It's a Virginia opossum. And I was very surprised to see it in my backyard. And what's interesting is these are animals of the southern United States. They've slowly been moving north as the temperature warms. They don't hibernate, so they need relatively warm winters to survive, and they're doing that. Here's a fun fact. It's the only marsupial that is native to North America. So they give birth to live young, and the young are raised in a pouch on the mom's tummy, just like a kangaroo or something. So there's a curiosity for you that we might not have been able to predict. So I think we're just about out of time. We want to thank everyone. I love opossums. I love opossums too. I love all the oddballs and underdogs, the skunks, the bats, all those sorts of things. If we didn't get to all your questions, we'll do our best to answer them on Facebook in the days to come. We're so glad that everyone could join us today, and by all means, get out there and explore the great outdoors of Ontario. There's a lot to see. Find out what critters live in your own neighborhood and what role they may play in the ecosystem. And I mentioned that there's a collective noun for a group of toads called a knot. So get out there and find a gaggle of geese or a romp of otters. How about a flight of dragonflies or a fluffle of rabbits? Lots of things to explore. And if you have any other questions, by all means, add them. Thanks so much for joining us, Megan. Thanks for your information and for the chat today. I hope you stay safe around your bear friend. And in another 2 weeks, we'll have another live event on June the 16th. So we hope that you'll join us for that. Thanks, everyone, and happy exploring.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and don't forget to come onto our Science North stuff as well, and check us out on Facebook and YouTube and all that jazz.
Yeah, you can find all our links in the chat, and